You are not depression, but you are experiencing depressed thoughts. And in terms of the emotions, your emotions are not you, but they are yours. And so a huge, I'd say, mistake that people make is that they will blame someone else for how they feel. You made me angry. You made me hurt. You've made me insecure. You've made me X, Y, and Z. The issue with that is if you blame someone else for how you feel, you're giving them the responsibility to make you feel better. Now that sounds fine if in front of you will always be a loving person who doesn't have an egoic mind and doesn't react and who will just shower you with love 24/7, and then you'll feel better. But that's not happening. If you give someone else responsibility to change how you feel, it's a little bit like locking yourself in a room and giving that key to someone else. So I've been through difficult experiences in my own life, which we may talk about, where my ex-wife was unfaithful. Now, if I had made her responsible for how I feel, I would have been powerless. Responsibility is the ability to respond. The definition of power is the ability to act. So if you give away your responsibility, you give away your power. The mind doesn't like that though, because it conflates responsibility with fault. So the mind often says, I don't want to take responsibility for how I feel because it means then I'm to blame or I'm at fault. And this is where that other piece comes in. No, you're not to blame. You're not at fault. You're not trying to create this emotion. It's understandable that anger is arising or sadness or anxiety or fear or whatever it is. That is not your fault. That is not you, and you haven't created it. But it's turned up at your door and it's knocking and it's here. So what are you going to do with it? It's your responsibility as to how you handle that.
Yeah, like I say, a huge fan of personal responsibility, huge fan of ownership, so that speaks to me so strongly, and it also empowers, because I think when you talk about some of these more challenging emotions that you were speaking about there, depressive, anger, upset, they're really quite overpowering at times. But if you, like you say, give away that power to respond, then you are almost left in limbo, or you're like a puppet on the strings of somebody else in terms of how they behave towards you at all times, which is a really unpleasant situation to end up in for anyone, let alone somebody that listens to a podcast that kind of speaks about personal development and how you can become more aligned with your true self.
If we hand away our responsibility to manage our own emotions and we blame others for how we feel, we'll become victims of our own lives. And like you're saying, we'll become puppets. And depending on who's around us, they lift that string and that arm goes up, or they tug on that string and that leg goes out, and we will feel as if we're lost, and it will feel incredibly overwhelming and overpowering, and there won't be a groundedness through which we'll have that resilience to be able to manage what we're feeling. I should be clear, what I'm not saying is that depression isn't a clinical condition. I'm a clinical psychologist and I completely value that. It's not to say anxiety isn't a clinical condition, and it's not to say that we can even eliminate all depression or anxiety, but what I am saying is that the depression or the anxiety or the feelings are here, and it is our responsibility to learn how to live with that or cope with that, or to find ways that we are more empowered in our own lives. And that may or may not bring down the levels of intensity of emotion that we experience. And there's a huge amount of data to show that that can be the case. So earlier when you're mentioning labeling emotions, we know from fMRI studies that when you label an emotion and you say, I am experiencing anger, for instance, it actually dulls the activity in the old primal part of the brain, the amygdala, which is responsible for fear and emotional regulation. So that part of your brain begins to dull down. Your prefrontal cortex at the front is responsible for impulse control and decision making actually ramps up. So you're having physiological changes within your brain that will give you that little bit of respite to be able to feel more in control of your current emotional situation.